All right, welcome back. Hello again. We are now on to episode 3 for building our very own video game using OpenGL and C++. And in this episode, we are going to be drawing a sprite to our screen. So we're going to be doing this with our window. This sprite is going to be composed of two different triangles here. So one right triangle like that, and then another one down in the corner there. To get this on the screen, we're going to need a few different things. For one, we're going to need to load in an image into our project. And to do that, we're going to use a classic C++ library called stb, specifically stb_image. There's a bunch of different libraries in the stb header library, whatever you call it. The only ones that we're really going to be concerned with, well, for now, is stb image, and then maybe in the future we might be looking at rectpack as well. I haven't really looked into it. We are going to need to do some rect packing in the future, but I mean, at this point, we don't really have to worry about that. If you don't know how to use Git, just go ahead and click download zip. That's probably the easiest way to get that started. As like a developer in general, it's really worthwhile to check out and learn how to use GitHub and Git commands. But I'm not going to force you to do that. So today, I'm just going to go through the old-fashioned way and download zip. The next thing that we're going to be doing is we are going to download GLM. So GLM stands for GL Mathematics. So it's a simple mathematics function, like matrices, 4x4 matrices, vectors, three-pronged vectors, and like a bunch of different functions on that. You can like use scaling, and there's, I forget what function we use quite a bit, but I mean, I have it in my notes somewhere. So we'll cross that hill when we get there. But as for now, we are going to be using GLM, and it's going to be very important. So go ahead, click download on that, and let's go and open up. Well, I guess let's go and put our libraries into our third party. So to do that, let's go to downloads. We got stb master. Let's go ahead and extract all. And we're not going to extract everything into our project like what we've been doing, because we only need one file, and that is stb image. So let's go ahead and copy that, and then go to users dwad source here. And repos, and then we saved it in Game Engine. So go to third party, let's create a new folder here, and we're going to call this stb. And we'll create a folder too. Why not just call this include? So it's set up quite like all of our other files that are third party. And paste stbimage.h into there. And that's all we should be doing for stb. Now let's go over to GLM. And this one we can extract all into our project. Oh, hold on. Whoops. So go ahead, select folder for extracting. And GLM has a lot and lots of files, lots of experimental stuff. And a lot of it is unnecessary, unfortunately. All we really need is the core products from GLM, so we are going to be deleting a lot of the different files inside of here. But, I mean, a lot of the experimental stuff, they're worth checking out. But for our case, everything that's not just the GLM file can get deleted. And it is gone. Well, not quite gone, because it went into my recycling bin. But I will delete later, along with all these files here in my downloads folder. I probably should delete those as well. All right, so we have everything set up. Let's go have our Visual Studios set up correctly. So we're gonna have to go through properties again, go to C++, and let's go ahead and add our include for GLM and STB. And luckily we don't have any library files to deal with, so it will just be includes. Let's go ahead and do that. Then, whoops, third party, STB, include. Click apply, and everything should work. So let's go ahead and check to see if we can include STB image.h. It looks like it recognizes it, and then finally glm.hpp. Both are there. Perfect. So now we kind of have a pretty large file. Our main class is starting to get pretty big. So let's go ahead and fix that. Let's move some of the stuff that we've been creating, specifically like the shader stuff, into their own files. So to start, I'm going to hide my camera, and it's going to come up with that message again. Thank you, Microsoft. And let's start off by creating our very own shader class. So let's call this shader.h. And I'm going to be copy and pasting quite a few different things into it, just because it's a lot of redundant stuff, stuff that we've already gone over. But I'll type out at least like some of the basics so you don't get too lost here. So with shader, a few things that we're going to need. We're going to need glad. This is so that we can do GL float and other GL generics. Next, we're going to need glm.h so we can access all the different GLM functions, all the different mathematics functions, and then we'll also need just string. And let's make our class shader. And shader, if we remember from our main, a few things that we're going to need to account for is this glent ID for the shader here. So this shader file is going to pretty much, it's not going to be going over our, isn't going to be like creating our, sorry, it's going to be holding on to our program IDs. So these are shader programs. These are not individual shaders. So I guess there could be a distinction made. We could call this class program instead of shader to be more specific. But we usually in like programming or in game development, a lot of people end up referring to programs as just shader programs because shader is a pretty generic sort of name for that. So let's go ahead and define our int ID. So it's going to be our program where we're going to be storing it under. And then a few different things. Let's go ahead and define string vs file path. And this is supposed to be a capital L. And we'll need fragment shader file path. And I generally put an underscore at the end if it's going to be a private function versus a public function where I do not, I omit putting the underscore. This is just how I do my coding. And then another thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to compile our shaders. So void compile. And that's going to be inputting going to be using our data. So we're going to need our VS data, vertex shader data, and our FS. And then the next thing that we'll need to be accomplishing, if I can actually spell this correctly, is we're going to need to set up our constructor. So it's just going to be shader ID is going to start off as 0, and when ID is 0, that means that there's no shader attached to it. You can be certain that that is true. Why is that? ID is a non-static member. Oh, okay. It was just erroring. And then we have to set up our deconstructor. And all we have to do is check for ID to see if it exists. So if there's a shader loaded inside of our program, ID will not be 0. So we need to delete that. So we call GL delete program and ID. And then ID is equal to 0. Just so we reset it in case we want to load our shader again after deleting it. Well, I guess that doesn't really make sense. If the deconstructor is called, this entire thing will just be non-existent. So this is kind of unnecessary. We're just going to set it up like that because why not? And we're going to have a bunch of different functions. So one is going to be load. This is going to be our public entrance for loading in our shader files using file names. So const glchar star vs file name, file path, and const glchar star fs file path. And then finally, we're going to be using road use. And all use is going to be doing is going to be calling the ever popular, where is it? GL use program. So since we have ID as a private member, we're going to have a public use. So we're not calling GL use program recklessly. So that's all the use function is going to be. The next bits that we're going to be going over is uniforms. So if we go to our VS right now, we have a layout. And layout is only accessible through kind of those groupings of data. So like the actual like array of floats. And what uniforms are they are accessible like per like batch of like data. So they can be accessible outside of just inputting like your array of floats. You can like have a uniform of, let's say, integer, and that says like a flag or something like that. And you can access this flag whenever you want, but it's not going to be loaded in like position is with like per grouping of floats. So like for instance, whenever, like let's say we want to make a triangle, but we want to set the flag so that if it's true, it draws the triangle upside down. So for like one batch of triangles, we draw them all upside down. Then we actually can change the uniform without changing the batch, and then draw the rest of the triangles with that are right side up by changing the flag value. So we need a way to access that uniform, and there is a very simple way to do it. And what we're going to do is going to create a bunch of different access points. So I'm going to just copy and paste a bunch of these in so that you can set up uniform values in a bunch of different ways. So like set bool, set int, set float, set vec2 for that shader program. And each of those uniforms will change accordingly. All right, so let's go ahead and create our shader.cpp. And let's go ahead and finish a lot of our shader projects. So we have compile, load, and use pretty much all figured out. The only things that we really are not or are uncertain about are set bool, set ints, and set out sets and so forth. And I'll go over how to set up like set bool, and then I'm just going to copy and paste the rest of them in just to make things a bit easier. So let's go to our main, and it's going to be looking pretty much the exact same as what we had here. So I think we want everything up to delete shader, so we can just copy and paste all the way up to here. And then let's go to our shader.cpp, copy paste all that in. And then instead of VS and FS data or VS code C string, we have VS data. And then file paths, we have to just change this to underscore because we have the string saved. And then it looks like we're going to need IOStream. So let's go ahead and include IOStream as well. And then instead of returning, we're just going to have to exit our function. So exit 1, exit 1, and exit 1. Now here, since we could have different shader files, we might as well also log our FS and VS file paths here. So let's go ahead and do that. And then oh, whoops. Yep. That looks all good. So our compile function is now completed. Let's go ahead and set up, oh, I already have those figured out, load and use. And then let's also set up set bool so I can explain some of the functions used there. The rest are like after learning one set. All the other ones are the exact same. You're just using different functions to set up, but it's pretty self-explanatory. The next bit is load, so we just go to main, and if you remember where we loaded in our file using string stream and file stream, we're going to use something similar here. And let's just go ahead and copy paste this. Looks like we're going to need these codes here. And let's also set up our VS file names or file paths to the VS file path here. And same thing with FS. FS file path is equal to VS or FS file path. Oh, and we're going to need string stream and IF stream as well. Get rid of all those. All those bars. I think it's just F stream. Yep, and that solves everything here. We gotta switch this over to exit instead of return. And it should be all good here. Do we need anything else? I guess we should probably call compile after we call load. So let's just go ahead and do that. Compile. And that is going to be using VS code dot C string, then fs code dot C string, and that should be all good. Then use, go to our main, copy GL use, program, we don't need this anymore. And instead of program, we're going to be using the ID of our shader. So that should be all done there. And then set bool. So let's go ahead and fix that. So set bool, all we need to do is call the GL function uniform 1i for one integer. And the location, we're going to need to also call another GL function, GL get uniform location. And we're going to pass through our program ID and then the name. So whatever name of our uniform is. So if you remember from what we were talking about earlier, we have a uniform int flag. Our name would be flag for that integer right there. Or I guess we could do bool or boolean. I actually don't know how exactly it's solved in the GLSL format or the code. And then we just pass through value. And it's something similar for each of these sets. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through and copy and paste all these. And we'll just go ahead and look at them. So we have set int, similar sort of idea to bool. It's using 1i, get uniform location, 1f for float, 2f for vec2, and then I guess two different ways to access the vec2s with float values, 4 vecs, and then these mats, which are 2x2 matrices, and then this is 3x3 matrices and 4x4 matrices. So that's how you get that done. So our shader should be up and running again. So let's go ahead and we can delete some of this stuff. Let's go ahead and include our shader.h and see if we can get that working. Cannot open source file. Did I spell something wrong? What is going on? Why is this not in the project here? Interesting. Well, let's define our shader. So shader, and that is just going to set our ID to 0. So let's go ahead and call shader.load. And we're going to input our VS file path and FS file path. And then we're going to shader.use afterwards. Oh, I see. I accidentally created those into the resources file because we were creating shaders there. So let's go ahead and move these into our main project. That makes sense. And then we'll remove and reload them. So add existing, just so these are added properly into our project. Move that into header. And let's see if this runs, see if we get our triangle again, and then we'll move on to the next step in the next episode. Oh, looks like it did not work. So something went wrong. likely with our implementation here. Let me check to see if I mess something up here. Just load, then use. Yep. Huh. I wonder what went wrong. I got no errors either to help me out here. So we'll just have to figure this one out on our own. Oh, there we go. We forgot to change program to ID, so we'll just go ahead and fix that here. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Now our program is set up properly with our shader, so we should get our triangle now on our window, and we do. So we got our shader class all figured out now, so we can actually just leave that to rest. Thank you guys so much for watching. In the next episode, we're going to continue on. We're going to be setting up our image and STB loader. So look forward to that in the next episode. Thank you so much, and goodbye.